Alright, so let's take a look at where we left off last time. Up at the top, let's press the play button to run our game. I'm going to click in my game view, and I'm going to press the W key, the A, and the D and the S. So we've got some basic movement controls. If you recall, we can also increase the speed of our spaceship from like 1 or 0 to whatever we'd like. So let's say we want to make it a little bit faster. I can enter 20. Let's press play again. Now you can see it runs a lot quicker. And this is a good way, as you get more comfortable with coding, to affect gameplay. Like maybe after a ship gets hit, it goes slower. You can get power-ups that'll make it go quicker. So maybe that'll be one of the power-ups that we add later. But what we'd like to do now is sort of have a projectile that we can shoot off that will stop us from sort of an oncoming onslaught of aliens or whatever the enemy's robots that you'd like. So inside of our script here, I'm going to right-click, go up to Create, and go to another C# script. Now I'm going to name this script Projectile. Let's double-click this script to open it in Visual Studio. So let's take a look at how we can incorporate if statements inside of our project. So in our void update here, I'm just going to type if for if, and I'm going to hit the tab key twice. This went ahead and populated the if statement for me with the if and then the open close parentheses, and inside of this is whatever we type. Now if you recall, update runs every frame. So what we can do here is we can say if input get button down and whatever we'd like our button to be. So let's say we want to do a we'd like to use the left mouse button. Let's do fire 1, and I'm going to hit Control S to save this. Let's return to Unity so I can show you if we might have to do a lowercase f, but overall how this works. Alright, so let's go to Edit and then go back down to Project Settings. And if you remember our input manager before, we did have a fire 1, and it looks like it is a capital. And it's mapped to our mouse 0, which is our left mouse button. So what we're saying here is every time I click the left mouse button, I'd like to do something, and it's going to check every frame to see what happens. So let's go to Window, and let's open up our console, for example. So we want to go to General, and then Console here. And what I'm going to do is I'd like it to print fire every time I press the left mouse button. So let's return to Visual Studio and see how to code that. Alright, so let's go ahead and do print, and then open, close, parentheses. Let's put a semicolon to end that statement, and then just put fire here. And I'm going to hit Control S to save this. Now if you see any red curly lines, double check your code against this or that you spelled things correctly. So let's return to Unity and see how this works. Alright, so here we are back in Unity. I'm going to go ahead and press the play button at the top. Now when I press the left mouse button in the game view, you can see we have an actual error here. And it's saying if you want to use an blah blah blah, it's talking about a mesh. That's actually not the problem right now that I was looking for. What I was looking for was I just wanted it to do nothing. And you probably guessed why it's doing nothing. If we select our spaceship, you probably noticed that we don't have this script, this projectile script, attached to our spaceship. So I'm going to left click and drag my projectile script here. Now when I press play, it'll load. And now when I press the left mouse button, you'll see it says fire. And every time I click the left mouse button, it's going to print fire there, which is great. That's what we want. Now, we want it though, we don't want it to just print fire. We'd like it to actually shoot off a projectile. So on our spaceship here, I'm going to go to Overrides here, and I'm going to hit Apply All to apply that, and then I'm going to hit Open. And what this does is this opens up an area that allows us to edit our prefab. So I'm going to go ahead and hit F to focus here. Now I'm going to have to change some of the settings in order to get rid of this flashing. But right now, what I'm going to do on my spaceship is I'm going to right click and I'm going to create an empty game object. Now this game object is going to serve as the area in which my projectiles are going to fire from. So let's put this one here. And that looks pretty good. Actually, you know what we can do is we can just put it at the beginning of our ship. After this, you should have, you feel comfortable enough to create multiple cannons if you want. But I'm thinking that might be a cool power-up All right, so once we're happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and click this arrow to lock this in place. But one thing I should do is just name this cannon. Or fire point would probably be a little bit clearer, since this is the point in which it fires from, and we might want to model an actual cannon. All right, so let's go back, and we have our spaceship, and if I expand this now, we have our fire point. So let's return to Visual Studio and see how we can script it so that it registers this point. All right, so at the top of our script here, I'm going to go ahead and press Enter, and I'm just going to paste the line of code. Now, what this is we're looking for a public game object, and what I named it is prefab to fire. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control S to save this, and let's return to Unity and create like a little sphere, and we'll use this to sort of serve as our rocket, and we'll later maybe attach a particle to it. So it's almost like a photon beam. So let's return to Unity. All right, so here we are back in Unity. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Alt and left click here, and then go down to Tools, Pro Builder, and I'm going to expand the Pro Builder window here, and I'm just going to make a new shape. And this shape is going to be a sphere. So I'm going to hold my left mouse button down and just drag out a sphere, and it's going to serve as almost a bullet. Now I'm going to hit F to focus on this, hit R, and just kind of scale this up a little bit. Now what's interesting, and we're not going to go into deep detail with this now, is with this sphere, we can actually go to Tools, Game Object here, and you can see we have a host of settings, and what we're looking for example, is let's say Effect, and we can add a particle system here, and we can make this particle system a child of this sphere. And what's interesting is you can see here that it has a lot of different settings. And one of the settings here, you can see there's shape. If I go to sphere, for example, you can see it emulates or emits from the center of this sphere. We can also do something like these other options like cone, for example. And I can hit E here and just rotate this. And what might be useful is if we just sort of like play around with the settings. If I hit 0, it goes that direction. If I do positive 90, it goes below. If I do 180, it'll go behind it. And this could be the trail, and we can adjust the duration. So if the lower we go, you can see that the particles die off sooner. We can make it looping. We can do a lifetime. We can lower the lifetime. You can see they end a little bit sooner. So this is our projectile. We can also adjust the cone size. So if we go to the section where it says cone, we can adjust the angle here and bring it a little bit lower. So this is sort of the little area, the little particles that's coming off of it. So it serves as sort of like a nice little rocket. And again, as our sphere moves around, these particles will follow. We can adjust the color of these particles so they're more of a gray or dark color. So what might be interesting is if you go online, you could find more tutorials that relate to this. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and select this sphere, and I'm going to rename this, I don't know, like shot or proton. Let's go with proton shot. And so this will serve, or it'll actually get fired out of the beginning part here. So inside this prefabs folder, I'm just going to grab this and I'm going to drop it inside that prefabs folder. Now something else that might be cool, because it's the same color as our rocket, is we can go to vertex colors here, and I can go ahead and apply maybe a let's say, I don't know, like a pink color to this. So, and then we'll close that out. And now we have a pink rocket or pink ball, whatever you want to call it, photon ball. And we have our particle trail working here. So if I hit play, you can see that comes off of it, and we can adjust the color. It might be a little bit too big too, so I'm going to hit R and just scale that down a little bit. All right, and then I'm going to update that size. And then what I can do is I can actually just delete it from the scene here. And then with my spaceship selected, remember we made that prefab to fire public. So I can actually just grab this and drop it inside of here. So there's our proton shot. And let's return briefly and let's enter the next line of code that allows us to fire off that prefab. All right, so we no longer need this print fire statement, which we were using to test whether or not our fire button was working. So let's go ahead and delete that. And inside these two curly braces, I'm going to hit Control V to paste a new line of code. Now what this line of code is saying is we'd like to instantiate something, which means spawn it. And what we're going to be spawning is this prefab defier. And the position in which we're going to be doing this is at the exact same position that whatever the prefab defier game object was in. We don't necessarily want that. We want to create a position that will be from where that fire point is. So right now, if we left this as is, it'll actually fire from the position of the spaceship in which the script is attached to. So I'm going to click at the end of this line and hit Control D. And I'm going to change it from prefab to fire point. And let's make the F lowercase. Let's save this. And I'm going to double click this fire point here. And I'm going to say fire point.position and fire point.rotation. Now, we have an error here, and it says game object does not contain a definition for position. And the reason for that is we want to get the transform.position and transform.rotation. So what I'm going to do is type transform here, which is the name of the component, and then I'm going to highlight this and I'm going to paste it next to rotation here, or behind the fire point there. So now what we're getting is we're getting the fire points, transform, position, and rotation. So let's go back in really quick and take a look at what this exactly means, just for clarity. So let's jump back into Unity. Alright, if you recall that our fire point here has a transform. So what we're doing by writing transform.position is we're getting the current position, which is here, and the current rotation. And when we fire this off, whatever the prefab is, it's going to follow that position and rotation. Let's also add to our proton shot here, which is the bullet that we're going to be firing off. Let's go ahead and add a rigid body component. And we'll leave gravity on for now. And let's go ahead and hit Control S, and let's press play and see what happens. So here we are back in our scene, and we can move our ship around. Now, if I left click, you'll notice I get an error. It says the variable fire point of projectile has not been assigned. Now, if we go back to Spaceship here, you can see that we have fire point here, but it has not been assigned. So it's important to pay attention to these errors. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this, drop it in here. I'm going to hit Control S. I'm also going to make sure that I apply all of these settings here so that if we delete our spaceship and then we bring it back in, you can see that it retains all of that information. Let's press play and see if we get that same error. Alright, so now what you can see when I press left, the left mouse button, we have all of these projectiles, and they're spawning as we press the left mouse button, but they're not adding any force, right? They're not really moving forward, they're just falling to the ground. Right, so let's zoom out a little bit so we can see that a little bit better. And that's not what we want. So in the next video, we're going to spend a little bit more time in making sure that our projectile moves forward at a rate, and we're really going to polish it there.